Imagine a world where the borders of today are still shaped by the echoes of a war fought over 3 millennia ago. What if I told you that a forgotten conflict, barely a footnote in the vast pages of history, laid the foundation for the modern map of Europe we recognize today? This is not just a story of battles and kings, it's a tale of how the fabric of society, the ideologies, and even the cultural identities of an entire continent have been sculpted by the long-ago clashing of swords and the silent plotting of ancient rulers. Welcome to the complete history of Europe, where we journey through time from the mystic landscapes of ancient civilizations, through the formidable chaos of the Middle Ages, to the transformative waves of modern civilization. This documentary will take you across epochs and empires, exploring how interconnected events have woven the diverse tapestry of European history. As we delve into this extensive past, consider how the legacies of each era continue to influence our present and will shape our future. Every chapter of history offers a new perspective on the challenges and triumphs that have defined a continent. Join us as we uncover the hidden links that have bound together the people and places of Europe across centuries of change. Thousands of years before the rise of modern cities and the nations we now know, the first chapters of European history were written by footsteps, those of early humans migrating across vast, untamed wildernesses. What drove these ancient peoples into the heart of Europe? Was it curiosity, a relentless pursuit of resources, or perhaps the allure of vast, unclaimed lands? Our story begins at a time when Europe was a wild mosaic of landscapes, a place where mammoths roamed, and vast forests stretched to the horizon. Into this world, bands of hunter-gatherers ventured, their journey marking one of humanity's most profound episodes of exploration and settlement. As we move forward in time, the narrative of Europe starts to shift dramatically with the dawn of agriculture around 1700 BC. Imagine the island of Cyprus, a scenic destination and a bustling innovation hub. Here, communities didn't just adapt to their environment, they reshaped it. Establishing the first known settlements marked a revolutionary departure from nomadic life. The inhabitants built walls, not just to claim their homes but to defend them. They cultivated wheat, barley, lentils, and peas, trading a life of constant movement for the stability of agriculture. This transformation would redefine their society and set a precedent for future civilizations across the continent. In these early days, Europe was not merely a bystander in the story of civilization but a dynamic participant, crafting a legacy that would echo through the ages. As we explore these ancient roots, we uncover the foundations upon which the vast edifice of European history would be built. Every stone structure, every fortified settlement from this time, adds a piece to the puzzle of how Europe evolved from a rugged wilderness into a cradle of civilizations. As the wheel of time turned, the landscapes of Europe bore witness to an era of monumental change, marked by the rise of megalithic structures that defy easy explanation even today. Picture the vast European countryside dotted with these enormous stone creations. Among them, Stonehenge stands as a colossal testament to human ingenuity and, perhaps, to mysteries yet fully understood. Who built these structures, and more intriguingly, why? Were they sacred sites, astronomical observatories, or elaborate burial grounds? Each stone, each alignment holds stories of deeply spiritual and technically sophisticated people whose whispers we can only strive to hear across the millennia. Transitioning from the mystical to the material, the Bronze Age ushered in a new chapter in the human saga, metalworking. Imagine the transformative power of this discovery. For the first time, fire and ore fused into bronze gave rise to tools and weapons superior to stone. This technological leap had profound implications for societies across Europe. It was not just a matter of better equipment. Metalworking catalyzed social and economic revolutions. Societies that mastered this craft gained wealth and power, dominating those that did not. Trade routes expanded, wealth accumulated, and new social hierarchies formed, setting the stage for the complex societal structures that would characterize later civilizations. But the evolution did not halt at bronze. The discovery of iron, a far more abundant and durable metal than bronze, marked the dawn of the Iron Age. This era saw the proliferation of iron across Europe, a development that democratized access to strong materials and reshaped the dynamics of warfare and agriculture. With iron plows, farmers broke ground on lands previously untamable. With iron swords, warriors forged empires. Thus, from the shadowy realms of prehistoric monument builders to the fiery forges of Bronze and Iron Age smiths, Europe was being sculpted not only by the forces of nature but by the hands of its people, whose legacy would lay the groundwork for the rise of great empires and the relentless march of civilization across the continent. In the unfolding epic of Europe's history, the stage was grandly set by the ancients of Greece, whose ideas forged the very essence of Western civilization. Envision the rugged landscapes of early Greece, fragmented by mountains and seas into myriad city-states, each a beacon of potential that burned brightly with the fires of ambition and intellect. These city-states, known as polises, were more than mere settlements. They were incubators of democratic thought and conflict, where human governance would take a revolutionary leap forward. It was here, in this competitive crucible, that democracy found its first voice. Imagine the agora, the vibrant heart of Athenian public life, bustling with citizens engaged in fierce debates over the very mechanics of governance. Here, power was not given but chosen, not asserted by divine right but by the consent of the governed. This radical shift illuminated the path from tyranny to self-determination. Yet, the narrative of classical antiquity is a story of political innovation and profound philosophical inquiry. Enter Socrates, the enigmatic philosopher whose relentless questioning peeled back the layers of complacency that veiled the Athenian society. His method sought answers and a deeper understanding of morality, virtue, and the essence of human happiness. His dialogues, spearheaded by questions challenging the foundations of accepted norms, drew the blueprint for critical thinking that would influence countless generations. Following Socrates, his student Plato transcended his teacher's inquiries, exploring the realm of ideal forms. An abstract perfection contrasted sharply with the flawed realities of everyday life. Plato's academy became the fulcrum of philosophical thought, where ideas about justice, ethics, and politics were pondered and passionately debated. And Aristotle's vast intellectual empire grew from the rich soil of Plato's teachings. Aristotle, a polymath like no other, ventured beyond his predecessors to systematize knowledge in ways never before conceived. His works spanned ethics, politics, metaphysics, biology, and beyond, forming the bedrock upon which the Western intellectual tradition would stand. As we trace the monumental impact of these thinkers, we see not just the birth of European philosophy but the genesis of a worldview that prizes reason, empirical evidence, and rational debate, the cornerstones upon which modern science and democratic society rest. Long before the famed philosophers of Athens pondered the mysteries of the universe, a lesser-known but equally fascinating chapter of European history was unfolding in the azure waters of the Mediterranean. This is the tale of the Minoans and Mycenaeans, civilizations that rose to prominence through mastery not of conquest but of commerce and communication. On the enchanting island of Crete, the Minoans built a civilization of astonishing sophistication. Their palatial complexes, such as the legendary Knossos, were centers of political power and cultural activity that dazzled the ancient world. Imagine vast halls and intricate frescoes depicting a society in harmony with the sea, a people whose ships ventured far beyond their island home to trade with distant lands. The Minoans established a network of trade that connected them to Egypt, the Levant, and beyond, exchanging not only goods like olive oil, wine, and saffron but also ideas and technology, weaving a tapestry of mutual influence that enriched the entire Mediterranean basin. Amidst this bustling trade, a remarkable development took shape, the creation of Linear A, a script as mysterious today as it was functional then. This script, used primarily for administrative and religious purposes, was the Minoans' tool for managing their complex society and is one of the earliest examples of written communication in Europe. The script's undeciphered symbols hint at a language lost to time, offering a tantalizing puzzle to modern scholars. North of Crete, on the mainland of Greece, the Mycenaeans took inspiration from the Minoans. They adapted the script into what we know as Linear B, deciphered in the mid-20th century, which revealed much about their culture and administration. The Mycenaeans, known from the epic tales of Homer, were more militaristic than the Minoans, building formidable citadels like Mycenae and Pylos. Yet, they, too, thrived on trade and cultural exchange, expanding their influence across the Aegean and into the wider Mediterranean world. The convergence of these two civilizations through trade and shared technologies represented a golden age of cultural prosperity that would lay the foundational ethos for European civilization. The networks they created, the scripts they developed, and the legacy they left behind can be seen as the first steps towards a connected European identity, a testament to the power of commerce and communication in forging the early chapters of European history. From the sun-drenched shores of the Mediterranean to the misty landscapes of northern Europe, the story of Rome's rise from a humble city-state to a sprawling empire is a saga of ambition, strategy, and unparalleled ingenuity. This chapter of our history begins not with a battle but with the vision of a civilization that sought to extend its influence far beyond its borders, crafting an empire that would endure for centuries and shape the future of Europe. As the Roman legions marched across diverse terrains, from the arid expanses of North Africa to the dense forests of Germania, they carried more than just weapons, they brought a new way of life. Rome's expansion was relentless, its strategies complex, combining diplomacy, military might, and often sheer willpower. Cities either opened their gates willingly or were taken by force, and through this mosaic of conquests, Rome forged a unified realm under a single banner. But what was the secret to Rome's enduring influence? It lay in their profound contributions to law, culture, and governance. The Romans were masterful architects not only of buildings but of society itself. They constructed an intricate legal system that sought to provide order and justice, principles that would echo across millennia. Laws such as the 12 Tables and innovations like Roman citizenship were revolutionary concepts that redefined the rights of individuals and the duties of the state. Culturally, Rome was a crucible where conquered peoples' artistic and intellectual traditions were melded with Roman ideals. Theaters, public baths, roads, and aqueducts sprung across the empire, marking the landscape with the indelible stamp of Roman engineering and urban planning. Latin, the tongue of Rome, became the lingua franca of the West, the medium through which literature, science, and law were communicated across diverse populations. Governance under Rome evolved into a sophisticated system that managed vast territories through local autonomy and central oversight. The Senate and, later, the imperial court directed policies that would impact regions far removed from the Italian peninsula. Rome's governance model, emphasizing civic duty and public welfare, provided a blueprint that future European states would strive to emulate. In reflecting on the Roman Empire, we see more than a tale of conquest and rulers. We see a vision of a world united under common laws, a shared culture, and a governance that sought, in its ideal form, to uplift rather than oppress. The legacy of Rome is etched not only in the ruins that dot the European landscape but in the very idea of Europe itself, an idea forged in the crucible of Roman ambition, wisdom, and the quest for a civilized world. The mighty Roman Empire, a symbol of unity and order, once stood as an unshakable pillar of civilization. Its borders stretched from the windswept highlands of Britannia to the sun-scorched deserts of North Africa, encompassing an empire that was the envy of the ancient world. But empires, no matter how vast or powerful, are not immortal. By the 4th century AD, the cracks in Rome's foundations widened, and the unthinkable became inevitable. It began with movement, restless, relentless, and unstoppable. Across the vast plains of Central Asia, entire tribes were on the move, displaced by forces unknown to the Romans. These migrations sent shockwaves across Europe, a tide of humanity pressing against Rome's weakening borders. The Goths, Vandals, Huns, and countless others surged toward the empire, not as an organized army but as a chaotic and desperate wave. Some came seeking refuge, others had opportunities, and many intended to conquer. The once mighty Roman legions, the guardians of the empire's borders, found themselves stretched thin, their resources exhausted. Battle after battle eroded the strength of an empire already plagued by internal corruption and political instability. In 410 AD, the unimaginable happened. The Visigoths, led by their king Alaric, breached the walls of Rome itself. The Eternal City, the heart of an empire that had ruled for centuries, was sacked, its treasures plundered, and its citizens left in shock. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled, the void it left was not empty for long. In its place, new kingdoms emerged, each carving out its piece of the fallen empire. The Franks under Clovis, the Visigoths in Spain, and the Ostrogoths in Italy rose to power, transforming the political map of Europe into a patchwork of fledgling states. Yet, these new rulers did not merely replace Rome, they carried fragments of its legacy. Roman law, culture, and governance did not disappear but evolved, woven into the fabric of these emerging societies. The fall of Rome marked the end of an era, but it was also the beginning of something new. The Middle Ages were not born from destruction alone but from the fusion of Roman traditions, barbarian vigor, and Christian ideals. This transformation would shape Europe's identity, sowing the seeds of kingdoms that would one day aspire to greatness. The question was not whether Europe would rise again, but in what form, and at what cost. Imagine a world where power is not centralized but scattered like seeds across a vast and divided land. A world where loyalty is pledged not to a nation but to a lord, where survival depends as much on the sword as it does on the plow. This was the reality of feudal Europe, an intricate web of obligations and relationships that defined life for centuries after the fall of Rome. As the great empire crumbled, the central authority it provided disappeared. In its absence, chaos reigned, and communities turned to those who could offer protection. This gave rise to feudalism, a system where land was currency, loyalty was the bond, and survival was the prize. At its core was the fief, a land granted by a lord to a vassal in exchange for military service. This relationship was forged out of necessity, creating a hierarchy that stretched from kings to knights and down to the peasants who worked the land. But this was no simple arrangement. The power lines were fluid, constantly shifting as alliances formed and crumbled. A king might rule a kingdom, but his power was often at the mercy of his vassals, each holding their fortified estates and armies. Knights, bound by a code of chivalry, swore fealty to their lords, but their loyalty could be bought or betrayed. And the peasants, bound to the soil, toiled endlessly in exchange for the promise of safety within their lord's castle walls. Amid this fragmented political landscape, one institution stood unshaken: the church. Rising above the petty rivalries of lords and kings, the church provided a sense of unity that transcended borders. Its influence was felt in every aspect of life, from the fields where peasants prayed for a good harvest to the courts where kings sought divine justification for their rule. The Pope, the spiritual leader of Christendom, wielded authority that could rival or even surpass any monarch's. Papal decrees could crown an emperor or launch a crusade, shifting the course of history with a single proclamation. Yet, the Church was more than a political force. It was the guardian of knowledge, preserving ancient texts and nurturing scholarship in its monasteries. It was the architect of cathedrals that soared toward the heavens, symbols of faith and ingenuity. And it was the shepherd of souls, guiding a population that believed their earthly struggles were a prelude to an eternal reward or punishment. Feudalism and the Church were the twin pillars of medieval Europe, one providing order in a fragmented world, the other offering hope and meaning in the face of hardship. Together, they created a deeply hierarchical and profoundly spiritual society, a society where the sword and the cross were often inseparable, shaping the destiny of a continent. Picture a cold and restless sea stretching endlessly under a steel-gray sky. The silence is broken only by the rhythmic crashing of waves against the hulls of long, slender ships. Their dragon-headed prows cut through the water with purpose, carrying warriors whose names would one day be whispered across Europe with fear and fascination. This is the Viking Age, when the boundaries of the known world were pushed to their limits by the audacity of seafaring raiders, traders, and explorers. Emerging from the rugged landscapes of Scandinavia, the Vikings were not bound by the limitations of land. The sea was their lifeline, a vast highway that connected their isolated fjords and forests to the riches of distant shores. Armed with mastery over shipbuilding and navigation, they launched expeditions that reached as far as the icy Greenland coasts and Baghdad's bustling markets. No coastline in Europe was safe from the shadow of their sails, and no treasure hoard was too secure for their ambition. But the Vikings were more than marauders. They were shrewd merchants, establishing trade routes that spanned continents. Amber, furs, and walrus ivory flowed from the north, while silk, spices, and silver came in return. In cities like Hedeby, Birka, and Dublin, founded and controlled by Viking hands, the worlds of the East and West converged in markets teeming with goods and ideas. These were not mere settlements but centers of commerce that helped knit together a fragmented Europe. The Vikings also reshaped warfare. Their hit-and-run tactics, swift and agile ships, and willingness to venture deep inland via rivers made them formidable. Fortresses and walled cities, once symbols of security, became targets instead. Their raids on monasteries, like the infamous attack on Lindisfarne in 793 AD, sent shockwaves through Christian Europe. Yet, it was not only through terror that they left their mark. They introduced innovations in ship design, battle strategies, and even governance, blending their practices with the customs of the lands they encountered. As centuries passed, the Viking Age began to wane. Many Scandinavians settled in the lands they once raided, becoming rulers, farmers, and traders. Their legacy endured in places like Normandy, England, and Russia, woven into the fabric of local cultures. Even as their longships faded from Europe's waters, their influence remained, shaping a continent's political, economic, and cultural landscape that would never forget the thunder of their oars or the boldness of their ambitions. The Viking Age was not merely an era of conquest but a period of connection, transformation, and enduring influence. Their journeys, driven by necessity and curiosity, bridged worlds and reshaped European history, leaving behind a legacy as complex and vast as the seas they once commanded. Imagine a world where faith was not just a personal conviction but the cornerstone of identity, politics, and power. A world where the call of a single voice could mobilize kings, knights, and peasants, sending them on an arduous journey across continents in pursuit of a cause they believed was divine. This was the world of the Crusades, a series of wars unlike anything Europe or the Middle East had ever seen, driven by faith, ambition, and the promise of eternal salvation. It began in 1095 when Pope Urban II stood before a crowd at Clermont and issued a proclamation that would reverberate through history. He spoke of the Holy Land, a sacred region under Muslim rule, and called upon the warriors of Christendom to take up arms and reclaim it. His words ignited a fire in the hearts of thousands. But what truly compelled them to leave their homes, families, and lands behind? Was it devotion to their faith, a hunger for adventure, or the promise of land, wealth, and prestige? The First Crusade saw an unprecedented movement of people from Western Europe to the Middle East. From the glittering courts of France to the rugged hills of the Rhineland, armies were raised not by states but by ideals. They marched for months, enduring starvation, disease, and hardship, driven by the belief that they were on a mission ordained by God. When they finally reached Jerusalem in 1099, their ferocity and determination led to a bloody victory. The Holy City was captured, and the Crusaders established a series of states across the Levant, planting a fragile foothold in the heart of the Muslim world. But the Crusades were far from a single event. They stretched nearly 2 centuries, each campaign reshaping the relationships between Europe and the Middle East. The Second Crusade, launched in response to the fall of Edessa, failed, exposing the limits of Europe's ability to hold its distant territories. The Third Crusade, led by legendary figures like Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, became a contest of chivalry and strategy, producing tales that blurred the lines between myth and reality. Beyond the battlefield, the Crusades left a profound mark on the societies they touched. For Europe, these wars opened up new connections to the wealth and knowledge of the East. Spices, silk, and scientific texts began to flow into European markets, while ideas about medicine, astronomy, and philosophy challenged old ways of thinking. Yet, the cultural exchange was not without cost. In the Middle East, the Crusaders left a legacy of violence and destruction, and the scars of those conflicts still echo in the collective memory of the region. The Crusades were not a simple clash of civilizations but a series of events shaped by a complex web of motivations, alliances, and betrayals. They were wars of faith and politics, greed and devotion, each carrying consequences that rippled across continents and centuries. As the banners of the Crusaders faded into history, they left behind a world irrevocably changed, a world where the boundaries between East and West were blurred and hardened, setting the stage for centuries of conflict and cooperation. Imagine a world in transition, where the age of fragmented feudal loyalties begins to give way to something entirely new. A world where kings no longer rule as just one among many powerful lords but as central figures who command armies, enact laws, and unite vast territories under a single banner. This is the story of the rise of the nation-states, a transformation that reshaped the map of Europe and the very nature of power itself. The seeds of centralized authority were sown in the shadows of medieval castles and cathedrals. In England, a series of calculated moves by monarchs like Henry II and Edward I began to chip away at the autonomy of the nobility. The establishment of common law, the foundation of Parliament, and the creation of a standing army marked the slow emergence of a kingdom bound not just by land but by a shared identity. Across the Channel, the story was one of resilience and ambition in France. The Capetian kings, beginning with Hugh Capet, started with little more than control of Paris and its surrounding lands. Yet, they gradually extended their rule through strategic alliances, marriages, and military campaigns. The crowning moment came during the reign of Philip IV, whose clashes with the Pope and his consolidation of power laid the groundwork for a unified French state. Spain, meanwhile, was forged in the fires of conflict. For centuries, the Reconquista, the campaign to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, dominated Spanish history. This was not just a military effort but a cultural and religious crusade. When Ferdinand of Aragon married Isabella of Castile in 1469, their union symbolized Spain's unification. By 1492, Granada had fallen, completing the Reconquista and heralding the rise of Spain as a powerful kingdom poised for exploration and empire. But this transformation was not without its trials. The 100 Years' War between England and France would test the resilience of both kingdoms. Beginning in 1337, it was a conflict not only for land but for legitimacy, a struggle between monarchs who claimed the same throne. Over generations, battles like Agincourt and sieges like Orleans became legendary, while figures such as Joan of Arc emerged as national pride and resistance symbols. As the war raged, another force descended upon Europe with devastating consequences, the Black Death. This relentless plague swept through towns and villages, claiming millions of lives and upending the social order. Entire communities vanished, labor became scarce, and the bonds of feudalism began to fray under strain. Yet, in the chaos, there was opportunity. Kings consolidated power, imposing taxes and laws that strengthened their authority. The plague survivors lived in a world that was beginning to look very different, where allegiances to local lords faded, replaced by a growing sense of loyalty to a centralized state. By the end of the 15th century, the concept of the nation-state had taken root. Borders were solidifying, languages were evolving, and monarchs ruled with new authority. This was a Europe no longer defined by the patchwork allegiances of the feudal age but by the emerging power of kingdoms that would soon dominate the globe. Yet, as these nations rose, so too did the rivalries that would define the centuries to come, a reminder that with every consolidation of power, there is always a cost. Picture a world where the darkness of centuries begins to lift, where the echoes of ancient wisdom, long buried beneath layers of turmoil and tradition, resurface with a clarity that sparks something extraordinary. It is a world poised on the threshold of transformation, where the ambitions of kings, the fervor of the church, and the toil of the common man begin to intersect with something far greater, a revival of the human spirit. This is the Renaissance, an era of breathtaking change that would alter the course of civilization forever. It began in the city-states of Italy, in places like Florence, Venice, and Milan. These were cities whose wealth came not from conquest but commerce, where bankers and merchants amassed fortunes and sought to leave a legacy beyond riches. Their patronage became the lifeblood of a new cultural awakening. Artists, sculptors, and architects were no longer bound solely to religious commissions. Their work began to celebrate the human form, the natural world, and the limitless potential of creativity. At the heart of this rebirth was a rediscovery of the knowledge and ideals of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Manuscripts long forgotten in monastic libraries or preserved in the Islamic world returned to Europe. Scholars pored over texts by Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero, uncovering a wealth of ideas that had been overshadowed for centuries. This revival of classical knowledge ignited a movement known as humanism, a philosophy that placed humanity, rather than divinity, at the center of the intellectual universe. It was not a rejection of faith but a call to understand the world through observation, reason, and the power of human ingenuity. In the studios of Florence, Leonardo da Vinci sketched designs that bridged the realms of art and science, blending anatomical precision with breathtaking beauty. In Venice's workshops, Titian and Bellini brought light and shadow to life in their canvases. Meanwhile, figures like Copernicus and Galileo challenged long-held beliefs in astronomy and physics, daring to propose that the Earth was not the center of the universe but just one planet among many. The Renaissance was not confined to Italy. Its ideas traveled across the Alps, taking root in France, the Low Countries, and England courts. Johannes Gutenberg's printing press became the engine of this cultural explosion, spreading books and ideas faster than ever in Germany. The works of Erasmus, Machiavelli, and Shakespeare reached audiences unimaginable just a century earlier, reshaping how people thought about politics, morality, and the human experience. But the Renaissance was more than art and science, it was a profound shift in how humanity saw itself. For the first time in centuries, there was a belief that man could shape his destiny and that the world could be understood, mastered, and even improved through knowledge and effort. It was an awakening of intellect and ambition, a moment when humanity dared to look forward while honoring the past. Yet, as the Renaissance reached its zenith, it also sowed the seeds of profound change. The questioning spirit it fostered would challenge the authority of the church, the structure of empires, and the very fabric of society itself. It was an age of rediscovery and disruption, setting the stage for revolutions in thought, faith, and power defining the centuries to come. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast and uncharted ocean, the horizon stretching endlessly before you, promising riches, power, and glory, but also peril, uncertainty, and the unknown. For centuries, the world's boundaries seemed fixed, hemmed in by oceans and deserts that dared explorers to cross them. Then came an age when men looked to the sea not as a barrier but as a bridge, an age when the map's limits would be redrawn, not by kings and armies, but sailors, merchants, and adventurers. It began in small coastal towns, in the workshops of mapmakers and the shipyards of master builders. Advances in navigation, ship design, and a thirst for discovery set the stage for a new era. In the 15th century, Portuguese sailors, led by figures like Prince Henry the Navigator, hugged the coasts of Africa, mapping lands and trading goods, slowly pushing further south and west. The winds of ambition carried them toward a goal that had captivated Europe for centuries, finding a direct route to the riches of the East. By 1492, the idea of discovery reached a pivotal moment. Under the banner of Spain, Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic in search of Asia. Instead, he found a new world, a continent teeming with resources and civilizations, a land that would forever change the course of history. In the wake of Columbus came fleets of explorers, Magellan, sailing around the globe, Vasco da Gama, reaching India, and Cortés and Pizarro, carving paths of conquest through the Americas. The consequences of these journeys were staggering. Once a fragmented continent of kingdoms, Europe became the center of a burgeoning global empire. The wealth of the New World, silver from Potosi, sugar from the Caribbean, spices from the East Indies, flowed into European coffers, fueling the rise of powerful nations like Spain, Portugal, and later Britain and France. Ports swelled with goods, and cities like Lisbon, Seville, and Amsterdam became global trade centers. Yet, this golden age for Europe came at an unimaginable cost. For the indigenous peoples of the Americas, Africa, and Asia, the age of discovery was an age of loss. Entire civilizations were upended, their lands taken, their cultures suppressed, and their populations devastated by disease and conquest. The transatlantic slave trade, born in this era, saw millions of Africans forcibly taken from their homes, their lives forever changed, and their suffering etched into the annals of history. Even Europe itself was transformed. The influx of wealth brought both opportunity and upheaval. Empires competed for dominance, sparking wars that spanned continents. Markets grew, economies expanded, and so did inequality and exploitation. The Age of Discovery was a time of unparalleled ambition and breathtaking achievement, but also of moral questions that would haunt the centuries to come. As the ships sailed further, the lines on the map grew bolder, the known world larger. Yet with each discovery came new conflicts, challenges, and reckonings. The oceans had been crossed, but the journey to understanding the true cost of conquest was just beginning. In the Age of Discovery, Europe was at the center of a global stage, but at what price, and for how long? Imagine a world where the rhythm of life is dictated by the rising and setting sun, where work is done by hand, and harvests depend on the whims of nature. Now imagine that world being utterly transformed within a single lifetime. This is the story of the Industrial Revolution, a time when steam, steel, and innovation reshaped not only the way people worked but the fabric of society itself. It began quietly in the rolling hills of 18th century England, where inventors and tinkerers labored in obscurity, refining ideas that would change everything. The spinning jenny, the power loom, and the steam engine were more than mechanical marvels, they were tools that multiplied human effort 100-fold. New machines roared to life in the coal mines of the Midlands and the textile mills of Manchester, pulling raw materials from the earth and spinning them into progress threads. However, this transformation was not confined to the workshop. It spread like wildfire, fueled by ambition and the pursuit of profit. Factories and railroads swallowed up entire towns, their once quiet streets now echoing with the sounds of progress, the hiss of steam engines, the clatter of iron wheels, the hum of industry. People flocked from the countryside to the cities, leaving behind the fields where their ancestors had toiled for generations. By the middle of the 19th century, cities like London, Birmingham, and Glasgow were teeming with life, dense, chaotic, and full of promise. The rewards were immense for those at the forefront of this new era. Industrialists like James Watt, Richard Arkwright, and George Stephenson became symbols of ingenuity and success, their names etched into history as the architects of modern industry. But beneath the surface of this prosperity lay a harsher reality. Life was grueling for the workers who manned the factories and stoked the furnaces. 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week, in conditions that were often dangerous and dehumanizing. Children labored alongside adults, their small hands fitting into the cramped spaces of machinery, their youth sacrificed to the relentless march of progress. The Industrial Revolution also began to reshape the natural world in ways humanity had never seen before. Forests were felled to fuel the furnaces, rivers blackened with the waste of factories, and coal smoke darkened the skies over Europe's great cities. The scars of industry cut deep into the land, marking the beginning of an environmental cost that would grow with each passing decade. Yet, for all its challenges, this era was a turning point. The Industrial Revolution gave birth to inventions that would define the modern age, railroads that spanned continents, steamships that crossed oceans, and telegraphs that made communication instantaneous. It brought goods to markets at an unprecedented scale, raised living standards for many, and set the stage for innovations that would shape the 20th century and beyond. But it also forced society to confront new questions. Who would control the wealth generated by this new age? What was the cost of unregulated progress? How would the world adapt to the inequalities and environmental destruction that industrialization unleashed? As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the Industrial Revolution left behind a world unrecognizable from what had come before. It was a world of opportunity and inequality, of innovation and upheaval. A world that had taken its first steps toward modernity, but at a rapid pace that no one could foresee where it might lead. Imagine a continent that had once prided itself as the cradle of civilization, its great cities humming with industry, its people basking in the achievements of science, culture, and progress. Now imagine that same continent transformed into a battlefield, its landscapes scarred by trenches, its skies filled with smoke, and its rivers running red with the blood of millions. This is the story of the world wars, two cataclysmic conflicts that shattered the illusion of peace, remade Europe, and changed the course of history forever. The First World War began in 1914, but its roots stretched deeper. For decades, Europe had been a web of alliances, a precarious balance of power held together by diplomacy and the threat of mutual destruction. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The unification of Germany had created a new and ambitious power, while the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires clung desperately to their fading influence. Nationalism surged across borders, empires competed for colonies, and militaries expanded to prepare for an inevitable war. The spark came in Sarajevo with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. What should have been a regional crisis quickly spiraled out of control. Alliances were activated, ultimatums issued, and Europe was at war within weeks. But this was no ordinary war. This was a new kind of conflict, one fought with machine guns, tanks, and poison gas in trenches that stretched for miles. Millions of soldiers endured unimaginable horrors while civilians faced hunger, disease, and air raids. By the time the guns fell silent in 1918, the cost was staggering. Empires collapsed, borders were redrawn, and an entire generation was lost. The Treaty of Versailles was meant to ensure peace, but instead, it sowed the seeds of resentment. Germany, humiliated and burdened with reparations, became a breeding ground for anger and extremism. In Italy, disillusionment fueled the rise of fascism, while in the Soviet Union, revolution gave birth to a new kind of state. Across Europe, the scars of the Great War remained raw, and the fragile peace of the 1920s began to crumble under the weight of economic collapse and political unrest. By 1939, the world stood on the brink once again. This time, it was a man named Adolf Hitler who lit the fuse, his ambitions for a German empire plunging Europe into the abyss of the Second World War. What began with the invasion of Poland quickly escalated into a global conflict. Blitzkrieg swept across the continent, bringing swift and devastating victories for Germany. France fell, Britain stood alone, and Europe seemed lost to the grip of tyranny. But the tides of war are never fixed. In the east, the Soviet Union withstood the brutal siege of Leningrad and the turning point at Stalingrad. In the west, the Allies landed in Normandy, breaking through the Atlantic Wall and liberating occupied nations. The war spread across the globe, from North Africa's deserts to the Pacific's jungles, drawing in nations far from Europe's shores. By 1945, the cost was almost unimaginable. The Holocaust revealed the depths of human cruelty. Cities like Dresden and Hiroshima lay in ruins, and over 70 million lives had been lost. But from the ashes of war, a new order began to emerge. The United Nations was formed, the Cold War divided East and West, and Europe began a long journey of recovery and reconciliation. Borders shifted, alliances changed, and the map of the continent was redrawn once more. The world wars were not just battles fought on the ground, they were battles for the soul of humanity, a test of whether the ideals of freedom, justice, and cooperation could survive in the face of unimaginable destruction. And while Europe would rebuild, the scars of those conflicts would linger, reminders of a time when the world stood at the edge of destruction, and a fragile hope for peace emerged from the depths of war. Imagine a continent battered by centuries of conflict, where the scars of war linger not only in the ruins of cities but in the memories of its people. Imagine nations once bitterly opposed, now daring to ask the unthinkable, could there be a way to prevent history from repeating itself? Could Europe, fractured by war and ideology, find unity not through conquest but cooperation? In the aftermath of the Second World War, such questions were no longer abstract. They were urgent. Europe lay in ruins, its economies shattered, its infrastructure destroyed, and its people divided by borders, both physical and ideological. The world's focus had shifted to superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union, leaving Europe to face an uncomfortable truth. If it was to recover, it would need to look inward and rebuild its cities and relationships. The first steps were small but significant. In 1951, 6 nations, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, formed the European Coal and Steel Community. Their goal was deceptively simple: to share resources that had once fueled their wars, binding their economies so tightly that another conflict would become unthinkable. It was an experiment in trust, and it worked. This success laid the foundation for something even greater. In 1957, the Treaty of Rome established the European Economic Community, creating a common market where goods, services, and people could move freely across borders. Over the decades, this union expanded to include nations from across the continent. By 1993, the Maastricht Treaty formally created the European Union, a political and economic alliance that would become one of the most ambitious experiments in cooperation the world had ever seen. The EU was more than just an economic bloc. It was a vision of a Europe that could work together to tackle shared challenges. It introduced a single currency, the euro, and created institutions like the European Parliament to give its citizens a voice. It fostered innovation, protected human rights, and promoted peace in a division-defined region. Yet, for all its achievements, the EU faced, and continues to face, profound challenges. The global financial crisis 2008 exposed deep economic disparities between member states, leading to tensions that have yet to be fully resolved. The refugee crisis brought by wars in Syria, Afghanistan, and elsewhere tested Europe's commitment to unity as countries struggled to agree on how to handle the influx of migrants seeking safety and opportunity. And then came Brexit. 2016, the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, sending shockwaves through the continent. The EU faced the reality of losing a member state for the first time. The debates over sovereignty, identity, and economic dependence that led to Brexit forced Europe to confront uncomfortable questions about its union's nature and future. Today, Europe stands at a crossroads. It faces rising nationalism, challenges to democratic norms, and the ongoing impacts of climate change and technological transformation. Yet, for all its struggles, the European Union remains a symbol of what can be achieved when nations choose cooperation over conflict, dialogue over division. It is a reminder that unity is not about erasing differences but finding strength in them and forging a shared destiny while respecting individual paths. As the EU looks to the future, it carries with it the hopes and lessons of a continent that has seen the best and worst of humanity. Its story is far from over, and the choices it makes in the coming years will shape Europe and the world it helps to lead. Imagine standing atop a towering cliff, gazing out over the vast tapestry of lands that stretch beneath you. Each valley, river, and plain tells a triumph, tragedy, and transformation story. This is the continent of Europe, where the whispers of the past meet the conversations of the present and where today's decisions will echo into the future yet unwritten. We have journeyed together from the ancient stirrings of prehistoric tribes, through the rise and fall of empires, into the heart of medieval conflicts, and across the transformative waves of modern times. We've witnessed the birth of democracy in the assemblies of Greece, the spread of law and order under Roman rule, and the artistic and scientific awakenings of the Renaissance. We've felt the ground tremble under the march of crusaders, seen the maps redrawn by explorers, and heard the clamor of industry revolutionizing societies. In each era, Europe has been a mirror reflecting the broader human condition, our aspirations for peace and prosperity and our struggles with conflict and change. The European Union, born from the ashes of two devastating world wars, stands as a testament to the continent's enduring quest for unity and cooperation, even as it faces the tests of economic disparities, migration crises, and the reverberating shockwaves of Brexit. But what lies ahead for Europe? As we peer into the future, we find ourselves at a crossroads, much like the generations that have come before us. Can the spirit of cooperation that rebuilt a war-torn continent guide Europe through the challenges of the 21st century? Will the lessons of the past serve as a beacon, helping to navigate the complexities of national identity, global responsibility, and human rights? I invite you, our viewers, to ponder these questions, to engage with the past to understand the present, and to envision the future. Which chapter of European history resonates most with you? Which lessons are most critical as we face the uncertainties ahead? As we close this chapter of our exploration, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel for deeper dives into history. Share this journey with others who seek to understand the forces that shape our world, and comment below with your thoughts, insights, and the periods of history you found most compelling. Together, let's continue to unravel the mysteries of the past, to better understand the challenges of the present, and to anticipate the possibilities of the future.